The whole question of the relationship that Kant saw the mind having to the world is itself a fascinating and difficult one. The reason why it's fascinating is because he really puts into circulation this idea that our understanding of the world is at least as much the product of the intellectual presuppositions we bring with us to reflect our reflections about the world as it is anything about the world itself. Indeed, to some extent, Kant was himself under the to some extent, Kant himself never escaped from the idea that the world is somehow external and our thoughts are essentially internal, and that there is therefore a kind of gulf which is unbridgeable between our thoughts and the world. How can our thoughts correspond to the world? That's a question which can't be answered by assuming that the way in which we describe the world immediately touches at every point essential features of the world as it is. In fact, one could say that Kant's ultimate mistake was the mistake of giving a name to that which he's trying to tell us cannot even be named. I mean, he says our minds shape what we perceive the world as being. But there is no way in which we can demonstrate to anybody that what we are saying about the world corresponds exactly to the thing in itself, the Ding an sich. Now, and I call this a mistake because if he had really believed in this impossibility, that it was truly impossible, then the question of whether there was a thing in itself for our thoughts to correspond to would itself become crucially problematic. And the relationship, I think in his best moments, Kant is saying, it's one thing to speculate about the nature of knowledge, it's another thing to handle the world pragmatically. We have to keep these two levels of discourse separately. And indeed, in places he says, there are some issues which are transcendental, and a transcendental issue for him is one which has essentially to be discussed in terms of how our thoughts are structured. On the other hand, there's the empirical world. In the empirical world, we find out how many oranges there are in this basket, this kind of thing. And when we count the oranges in a basket, we're not for the time being perplexed about the foundations of mathematics. We're simply using the foundations of mathematics. So we're using arithmetical procedures in the way that we call counting, and this is quite unproblematic. So that what for Kant is problematic philosophically is something which, strictly speaking, should never be allowed even to mention the thing in itself, because the thing in itself is the last relic for him of the misleading images of the relationship between the mind and the world, which he was trying to escape from, which he thought were equally fallacious, whether they were put forward by the rationalists or by the empiricists.